something that it's as if, these are my words, these are my images, as if something of the mystery reaches out and grabs you in a moment that maybe you were not expecting. And in that moment, everything changes. That it's a kind of recognition that this action, this encounter, this event has to do with your life and the deepest possible, most meaningful and mysterious way of being in the world, that this encounter is that important. And I have not seen that kind of articulation anywhere else. I am fairly widely read in mythology and in depth psychology and so on, but this particular moment or an encounter, it's not it's not something that one necessarily chooses or can work towards, but in the right circumstances, something might happen. So I was really intrigued by that book, and intrigued by the person who wrote that, who had that sense. So that's how we became friends. That was a long time ago. And so here, since probably most of you know plenty about Bill Plotkin, here's what Thomas Berry wrote. As we enter a future I just got this feeling. As we enter a future where humans and the natural world are more intimate with each other, we will surely be powerfully influenced by this new guide into the mysteries of nature and psyche. In Soulcraft, Bill Plotkin gives us an authentic masterwork. In the substance of what he has written, in the clarity of his presentation, and in the historical urgency of the subject, he has guided us far into the new world that is opening up before us. We will not soon again receive a work of this significance. So I just realized I'm reading that in the Thomas Berry Hall. So would you please welcome Bill Plotkin.
Thank you, darling. Wow. That was pretty good. For me, that was pretty good to have Thomas's words read here in Thomas Berry Hall. So I hope it's not too hot. If the sun finds you, feel free to move around. So I don't know if you know this. What we're actually going to do here is I'm going to interview Brian about his journey of soul initiation. That's what I call it. How many of you have read Brian's book, Cosmogenesis? Okay. For those of you who don't have your hands up, this reminds me of something you said about someone else the other day. The world divides neatly into two kinds: those who love the book Cosmogenesis and those who haven't read it yet. It's an amazing, amazing book. And if you just knew nothing about Brian and his work, and you read the title, you'd think it might be kind of dense and maybe even dweebish or something. But it's an incredibly well-written book. It's a page turner and a cliffhanger. I mean, every chapter ends with a cliffhanging, so you have to go into the next chapter. And he teaches us all kinds of things about the cosmos in this book. But the book, as he says, is also it's an autocosmology, which is a kind of autobiography. It's the universe as the unfolding of the universe as Brian Swimme. And each of us has potentially that kind of story. So I thought, well, this could be fun. That you and I, Brian, we could kind of just talk about it. We haven't rehearsed this. We haven't even talked about it, hardly. So who knows what will actually happen. But there's three things that are, I'm hoping that can be in conversation with each other. One is cosmogenesis itself. The second is Brian's artistry as a storyteller, his artistry in unveiling the new cosmic story and in composing it for us in books and all kinds of media, and telling the story. The third thing is his journey of soul initiation. Those three things. I find there's some really interesting relationships between those three things. Cosmogenesis itself, Brian's artistry as a storyteller of the new cosmic story, and his journey of soul initiation. Now, here's the problem. Some of you don't know what I mean by the journey of soul initiation. And I wrote a 500-page book on it, and it wasn't enough pages to really do justice to it. So I'm going to attempt, I needed about maybe 10 minutes at the most to set things up here. So I want to say a little bit about what I mean. Okay, first of all, what I mean by soul is probably not what you think. I'm not talking about the human psyche in general. I'm not talking about things that maybe leave our bodies when we die. I've come to an unusual definition of soul, and what I mean by it is the unique place that everything takes in the larger ecosystem of the watershed or the planet or the universe. Everything, every creature, every being, every place takes a unique place and is born to take that unique place. But it's something in the human realm that cannot be described or identified in any of the ways in which contemporary humans usually we identify ourselves. It's not a social role. Soul is not a social role, and it's not a vocation. It's not a job. It's not a career. What does that leave? See, most contemporary people would say, what does that leave? And what it leaves is soul, which is dropped out of the conversation many hundreds of years ago, the way I mean soul. Okay, so here's a quick way to maybe feel your way into it. Monarch butterflies. I think probably most everybody knows that monarch butterflies, at least some of them, overwinter in Mexico at a particular grove of trees, and they spend their winters more like in Canada. And it takes something like, correct me if I get this wrong, something like 5 generations to get from Mexico to Canada and back. So the ones that get back to Mexico, their great-great-grandparents had never seen Mexico before. And they know to get back to this same grove of trees. Now, I want to distinguish two things. One is what I believe scientists get fixated on when it comes to monarch butterflies, which is a really, really good question, which is how do they do it? How do monarchs navigate? Great question. But I haven't seen any scientist yet, probably because I'm not well read enough, who asked the question, how do they know to do it at all? Not how do they do it, but how do they know to do it? My answer would be, well, That's their soul. They were born to do exactly that and to gift the various ecosystems along the way by going on that journey. With salmon, it's a very similar thing about um, being born in one place, not having parents teach you anything, and you know not only how to get to the sea and back, but that's something that would be a good idea to do. And I don't think it's because they're conformists and notice that someone else is doing it. Okay, so in some indigenous traditions, the elders talk about what can be translated as original instructions. That each being is born with instructions of how to do what they were born to do, which is to say, their unique way of enhancing life, not merely sustaining it, but enhancing life. It's a principle of life everywhere, that life enhances life. That's what life does. Unfortunately, the human species has been an exception to that for quite some time. We could go into why would that be, but that's a different story. So consider, if you haven't already, that we human beings are born with original instructions, with a knowledge of how we are meant to gift life in our lifetime. And it cannot be defined by a vocation or a social role. And so we humans probably, unlike any other creatures, including other mammals, one could quibble about that, but we humans have to go through an initiatory process after puberty sometime in order to remember who we were born to be. That's what I mean by soul. Okay. The journey of soul initiation is a journey of that the vast majority of contemporary people who live in industrialized, dominator, egocentric, anthropocentric societies, like most of us, never get to the place where that journey even starts. You could say, if you were just a little bit cynical, that contemporary cultures are designed in such a way to keep that from actually happening. It's the way that we raise children and support or fail to support teenagers. So the journey of soul initiation, as I understand it, has been mostly lost in contemporary societies. And we're trying to find our way back into it. When it starts, the journey starts. It's not because someone chooses it, it's because it starts. And it starts because you've matured enough, you've been prepared enough, psychologically, socially, spiritually, for it to start. Then it typically lasts several years. It's not a weekend workshop. In a healthy society, it might last a couple of years anyways, at least. So my colleagues and I at Animist Valley Institute have been tracking what are the patterns of this journey. And again, I've written about it. There's so many things we've learned. But I just want to say one thing before I invite Brian up here. There's three domains or contexts in which the journey of soul initiation still happens, to my knowledge. One is among surviving intact indigenous people. So not just surviving indigenous people, but whose cultures are still intact, which might be relatively few indigenous people because of how dominator, imperial, colonial societies have undermined the cultures of indigenous people. But I'm quite certain there are still some intact and surviving cultures. And so I believe humans, from the beginning of the human story, have been the elders of the village, have supported the youth to go through this journey. So that's one place among indigenous people. The second place is the, I think, still relatively rare contemporary people who've started to develop our own ways of doing this, not stealing or appropriating from indigenous people, but finding the roots in our own Western or other cultures. Well, how do we do this? So at Animus, from the beginning, we were just really super careful not to use the maps or the practices or the ceremonies of indigenous people. Okay, the third place I find the journey of soul initiation still happening is in occasional contemporary Western people who just stumbled into it and they didn't even know what was happening for them. And for some reason, maybe we'll get to talk about that a little bit here this hour. Some people are managed to find their way anyways. Contemporary people, despite no support and virtually no cultural knowledge of even such a thing existing. And one of the really interesting questions for me is, what's true about those kinds of people? Both their history, their personal history, but also their psyches. We'll be asking Brian that question. And I'm especially interested in this. Oh, examples are, that I know about, are Carl Jung. How many people have read all or part of the Red Book? Okay, not that many. I'm quite certain it's his journal of his journey of soul initiation. And he's quite clear in it, and since that he didn't know what was happening to him. So Carl's an example. Thomas Berry himself is an example. Joanna Macy, I wrote about Joanna's experience in my book, Nature and the Human Soul. She didn't know what was going on, which makes it that much frightening and less likely to succeed, but it does for some people. My beloved Janine, who introduced me, she went through it, didn't have anyone explaining to her what was going on or supporting her along the way. Maybe, no, all those people did have kinds of support, but not from someone who actually knew what was going on, but still loving, deep support. And Brian, I believe you are another instance of someone who's gone through this. So when I read Cosmogenesis, maybe a third of the way into it, I said, I am reading a telling of soul initiation journey. So, Brian, you can come up at any time. This will only hurt a little. Great. So here's some of the patterns I know about, and I got about 5 that I hope we can get to. Maybe we won't have time. But the first one is this. People who are grabbed by the ankles by the underworld or by soul and brought down into what I call Soul Canyon are people who've had a genuine success at what mainstream society considers to be success. But more specifically, actually is a better way to say that people who manage to find their own way into the journey of soul initiation are people who succeeded at the tasks of what I consider the stage of life beforehand, which is, I call it the oasis. And it's early adolescence, but for most contemporary humans, no one ever gets out of early adolescence, according to me. So I'm not talking about teen years, I'm talking about a psychological stage. And the task of that stage, early adolescence or the oasis, is to create a personal or a social presence that's both absolutely authentic to who you are and socially acceptable. Not only acceptable, but that you get some praise for it, like you made it. And as far as I think the deep psyche is concerned, or mystery, or soul, what soul's concern is that you've demonstrated to it, soul, that you know how to create a personal social presence, vocational, etc., that works, that people will hire you for it, and they'll invite you to parties, and maybe someone will even marry you, and so forth, and you have a circle of friends, and you're doing it authentically. It's harder than it ought to be, but so for you, Brian, well, before we just want to put like two patterns here together. The other one is what happens once you succeed at that is a life passage that at Animist we call confirmation. And what's being confirmed is that you have succeeded at creating a social vocational presence that works. Great, now we know you'll be able to do it again after your soul initiation with a different desired outcome, which is not social acceptance, but creating a self that is a vehicle for your soul work in the world, your gift to the world. Okay. So what's being confirmed at that life passage is that you've done that. And the second thing that be confirmed is you're ready to descend towards soul. And for that to happen, you basically have to lose faith in the story that you've been living and what you thought the world was and what you thought it was to be a human being. And it's not a happy moment. It's a very, very challenging moment. So, Brian, when I read Cosmogenesis, I was rooting for you there in the early chapters about, oh, right, he got his first job. You got your first job as a professional mathematician at the University of Puget Sound. And you've been identified by the chair of the board or the president or both of the university to be someone who's going to help make the University of Puget Sound the Harvard of the West. I mean, this is a kind of an incredible success. Plus, you're married, apparently quite happily married. You have your first child. You have friends. You've made it. And then, yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then something happens. And I'm going to ask you about what happened. But it occurred to me today to reference a poem by D.H. Lawrence. I think it's called A Man Who's Come Through, something like that. And in it, I don't know if I can recite the lines exactly, but in it, he says something like, "Who's that knocking at the door in the night? It's someone come to harm us. No, no, it's the three strange angels. Admit them, admit them." Okay, so, and the three strange angels are the one that come to your house after you have completed your first construction of a personality that works with a job and so forth. And they say, "Great job. We're leaving now." And you say, "What do you mean we?" And you say, "You're done. You've got it. You're now going on to the next stage of life and this initiatory journey. And you have 30 seconds to say goodbye. Make it quick. And here are your three strange angels, as far as I'm concerned. But then I would like you to talk about it. Dolores Marrow. Yeah? She helped you lose your faith in the old story. The second one, you have some great names of the people in your book. The second name was the chair of the math department, Ron, what's his name?
Van Akevoort. Ron Van Akevoort.
Okay, I couldn't pronounce that, but yes. And the third one is, the third strange angel is right here in the room. And her name was Monica de Rasp before she got the hyphenated part. Okay, so is that true? Did those three people?
Three strange angels. I
Yeah.
never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The so yeah, I always wanted to be a professor, and I didn't want to go to I didn't want to go to a university that was focused entirely on discipline research. I wanted to connect with other departments. So what was so great was University of Puget Sound. The president and the vice president, the dean, they all loved that idea. They were there pushing that before I came along, but it was a perfect fit, And so so Dolores, she opened my eyes to the way in which the university was. A good part of it was serving the military. I didn't even know that. And so I went in with the idea that the universities were about something noble, about chasing truth and discovering what's real, and to see that it had been deformed somewhat. And it wasn't just that the statistics of the number of physicists that were working for the Pentagon. That alone was crushing. But then also to see it in the other professors that often their primary concern was not the truth. It was about departmental politics and then financial security and these are not bad things, but nevertheless, Dolores made that clear. The one great moment, which kind of captures it, was you think this is all ivory towers, and then people are wandering around doing nothing but searching the truth. But it's and you look at that ivy, climbing up on those brick walls. Tear that down, because what you should have there is the camouflage on our jets that are bombing and so forth, so that it was, I just felt the facade, And then the department, the chairman, good person, and so he pulled me aside and what he, and I became unhappy, and I was causing frustrations in the department because I didn't know what was going on. I certainly wasn't happy with things. I didn't know why. And so he pulled me aside, and the way he really cared for me, and he really wanted me to just relax, and he started praising the retirement program. That did it. It was like my mind fogged out. I dissociated. I didn't know that even the word until somebody explained it to me later. And then
let me just say, Ron, the chairman of the math department, he was an unusual kind of strange angel in that he was depicting how great life could be if you stayed at the university. And we'll assume he consciously didn't know that he was actually painting a picture that made you go dead. Just like, that is not the life I want.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And then I trying to find my way out of it. I came up with the idea that if I could teach a course that really looked at the meaning of life and of what it means to be a noble human. I was teaching mathematics and physics, but I still had that urge to do that, and I tried, and it was turned down, and so that, and then in the midst of that kind of collapse of hoping for a dream, I ran into Monica Doraz at that time, and she had these questions that she wanted to know about the relationship of mathematics and philosophy to God and spiritual enlightenment. I mean, that kind of conversation. And afterwards, I realized, oh, that's what I wanted too. That's what I thought university life would be. And it wasn't. It finally culminated. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and go over to my office and write. And I just try to write my way out of the confusion in the midst of alcohol abuse and so forth. But the one line that I wrote down that really captured the whole thing was, "I am a cipher." I recognized that I was a cipher. That was the three strange angels. Yeah.
What do you mean by I am a cipher?
Well, what does cipher mean? Anyone? Where's Google when we need it? What it meant to me was like a zero, and like a piece of paper that's being blown away in the wind. It's kind of no substance, no depth, just like I was a facade. I was becoming one without knowing it.
Yeah. So at that time in your life, would you say like your old questions or ambitions were diminishing or disappearing and new questions showing up? Like, because one thing you said about your encounter there with Monica was that you were really, really bothered about her question about infinity. And you realized it was because it was your question too. And there's this amazing scene where you go up to the 6th floor tower and there's an electric storm. Maybe it's at night, that's the way I imagined it. And there's this big storm coming. And of course I thought of Rilke's poems about big storms. You are not surprised by the force of the storm. You have seen it growing. The trees flee, their flight sets the boulevards streaming. And you know he whom they flee, the storm that they flee, is the one you move toward. So I imagine you there on the tower and you move toward it. And you said something like that in your book. You wrote something like, wait, do I have it here? Yes, I uttered words, a kind of prayer directed at the storm, Tell me what to do. Did you receive an answer? Then, ever?
Well, I mean, the answer I received was, like my life was falling apart, and I came to Whitby. It was called Chinook Learning Community then, and in the farmhouse over there used to have a library. It was really extensive. It was like 3 shelves, and also Chinook put out a newsletter, a kind of a journal, and that the answer was that article I read by Thomas Perry. So when I read those words, and he calls it the new story. It's published separately, but it's also in his books. But it was just like, yes, that's who I am. That's what I'm about. That was the answer.
Yeah. Let's see. So that also resonates with a pattern on the journey, which is there's a time once you've lost your faith in the old story and the old ambitions, that 2 things happen more or less at the same time. And I call them the crisis and the call. And the crisis we've been talking about, the crisis of being a professor at a university that serving the military and so on. And the crisis of some really big questions that you hadn't known were yours. in the crisis of a life that looked really bland as possibly being your future. And by the way, there's another thing I'm tracking as a crisis, and it's your encounter with Una. Is that how you say your name?
Yeah.
Outside the church,
Yeah.
in which, do you want to tell us that story and how it was a crisis for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So, she was one of the most brilliant students, and she, as a freshman, she asked for the meaning of life. Got to get all emotional. She asked me, "What's the meaning of life?" And she asked it in front of a group of, it was a class I was teaching, and she asked the question. I said, "Any further questions?" I'm doing this, the special relativity, and she said, "Yes. What's the meaning of life?" And there was a kind of a laughter, a titter, in the sea of students. And she looked around at them and acknowledged, smiled, and so forth. But then she came back and she was serious. And so I, what I told her in the group was, almost in terms of meaning and substance, identical to what I just did today, right? In other words, it was so deep in me but what ended up really, really, really bothering me was that when she graduated, I bumped into her, like you say, outside of the church, and she was going to work for Dow Chemical. And at that time, I was so wrapped up in the destruction that the chemical companies in particular had done to our planet. And I thought, it's, what did I do? I gave her all of this science education. And so she had the power to go work for a corporation. But I didn't give her any wisdom. It still bothers me.
Yeah. Bothers you? Whoa!
I just got her son.
Yeah.
Now we're more eye to eye. Am I breaking anything?
No, you're not, but I'm gonna sit you up so you're safer.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you guys can pull forward.
Yeah. Can we do that? It is hot here.
Okay. I just want to get scorched to match my. Oh, okay.
Okay, so the way you said it, Brian, in your book is, this is what Dolores wanted me to see. It was right in front of my eyes. I taught science to children so they could poison the planet. Ouch. Yeah. So the crisis in your life was really big, and it had its health consequences as well with your heart. You were self-medicating with screwdrivers sometimes. And this is what happens when the journey starts. Not the details, but your life is falling apart. It's not because you weren't successful in your life. It's actually because you were successful, and soul sees to it one way or another that there's that knock on the door in the night. With the crisis comes the call. There's something that calls us to the depths, that infects us with questions that, as David White would say, have no right to go away. That questions that can make or unmake a life. And so I really love it that we're having this conversation here at Woodby Institute, because this is where you came, as you mentioned. It was 1980?
1979.
1979. during, incidentally, your first Saturn return. And you stayed in Bag End cabin. Are you there this time?
No, I'm not. I asked to be, actually. But
You did. Okay, and you just picked up almost randomly a book on the shelf, and it was your first reading of Thomas Berry. So that was the call. I was like, I imagine you said to yourself something like, that's the direction I'm going. More you can say about that?
Well, that's exactly what it felt. That's the direction I'm going in. And inside the Bag End, somebody had placed scratch paper, and so I started to write, and it just roared out of me, and everything I knew and was thinking, I just roared out of me, and then later on, like say a month later, I read it, and it's almost incoherent. I mean, I could read it and make sense of it, but nobody else could. It's a mess, right? But that was the original manuscript for Cosmogenesis.
That was the original
Manuscript.
No, really?
Yeah, that was the first draft.
Wow.
I mean, look back on it, I can see it. So it's so nice to hear that you think I wrote it well. It did take 40 years.
Yeah. One thing you wrote after reading that first Thomas Berry article, you said, trying to find it here. Something about my mind was combustible matter that Thomas's words set ablaze. Phrases like creation mystique. I had never heard that phrase before. Even more penetrating were the phrases cosmological myth and new cosmic story.
They were so magical. The words were so magical.
He said, I did not have any sharehold in what these might mean. That didn't matter. What I knew beyond doubt was that my destiny was tangled up in those words.
Yeah.
Okay. So as a soul initiation guide, I read that and went, the call. Okay. And what happens after the call, if you say yes, and you did say yes, is that you're now a person is in the stage of life I call the cocoon, which is not a comfy place. It's a place where caterpillars go to die and leave behind their caterpillar life and turn into caterpillar soup. And so you were on your way to soup at that point. And the archetype, the human archetype in that stage is the wanderer. That you don't know exactly where you're going or how to get there, but all your senses are completely alive to any signs that show up of any sort. And so signs did start showing up. Oh, by the way, okay, here's a quote from my book, Journey of Soul Initiations. It's about the wanderer. You, the wanderer, exist outside and beyond the benefits and limitations of selfhood. You exist outside and beyond the benefits and limitations of selfhood, social role, and cultural norms. Your capacity and eligibility to make things happen is minimal. You're more a passenger than a driver. You are a seeker, but you cannot decipher. You can cooperate, but you cannot make it happen. You are not a solver, but that which gets dissolved. So soon after that, you met Ken, and I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name. Is it Fate?
Fight.
Do you know why I was hoping it was Fate? Okay, Ken Fight, okay. And who was a professional fool. And Matt Fox recommends you connect with Ken. And you did. And because you were following signs.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? Why did that make sense to do for you?
So Ken Fight, he called himself a professional fool. Some of you know Paul Winter and his Miss Gaia. Paul dedicated Miss Gaia to Ken Fight. He's a magical person, and the way forward for me was, the image that I held in my mind was to gather together, like what Deanna said earlier on, science and spirituality. So in other words, trying to find my way to some sort of wisdom. And so I had this idea of, it's funny, of gathering together intelligent people and discussing these things. I swear to God, that's what kept me going. And so, Matt Fox happened to pass through Tacoma, and I read his book on Meister Eckhart, and it was just so filled with ideas that are identical to what we know from quantum physics. And so I thought Matt Fox would be a great person to talk to. And so I had this image of going. The image was to go to like a monastery on top of a mountain with lots of snow and ice, and to gather there with physicists, and theologians and artists, and articulate the outlines of a new civilization. And then so I wrote that to Matt, and he called me up and he said, "You ought to meet with Ken Fight. He's a professional fool." And I didn't meet sort of my standards, right? So I went there, and it was a strange encounter in that he was a Jesuit priest, and I'd been educated by the Jesuits, for years. And I walked into the room. There's like 3 people in there, and he was sitting cross-legged, and he stood up, and he was exactly my height, which is really rare. He was 6'5", wearing a jean jacket, the kind of thing I used to wear when I was a teenager. And he didn't say, "Hello, how are you? Glad to meet you, Matthew Fox." Nothing. He just looked at me and pulled me closer, and he said, "What are you doing to heal?" I was doing mathematics and physics. I couldn't connect to that. What? It was just like I didn't think like he thought, but I could see why Matt Fox, he was trying to get me out of whatever rut I was in. But and then of course he dies, and then
Car accident.
And then Matt Fox calls me up and asks me to replace him at his institute, because Matt had a dream where Ken Fight turned into me. And I thought, I remember I'm telling Denise, and I go home, I have a new idea. And, this guy had a dream, and in the dream, I guess some guy turned into me. So can we move to Chicago?
And we'll add, Brian and Denise already had plans to move to Boston. I think MIT.
It was all set up to go to MIT as a postdoc, right?
Yeah. And so one thing we follow when we're wandering into Soul Canyon in search of our destiny is dreams. We follow our dreams. It's a little bit unusual to follow someone else's dream, but that's how it comes sometimes. Matt Fox has a dream, and Brian and Denise's life changed significantly because of that. Any more on that?
Well, I think I went back and forth. It was like my whole life had been, I want to be a professor, and then I'm miserable. So I was, do I want to stay or do I want to leave? Back and forth, and I sort of hinted at it with my parents, and that didn't go over well at all. And I knew what my father-in-law would think of me. So there's all this kind of tension. And then in the midst of that, I had a dream. And the dream was, it started off with a big fight. I was slashing these people to death and blood all over the place. And then Denise and I were running, and she was bloody too. And we were running down Orchard. I remember the road because it mattered so much to me, Orchard Road. And as we ran, the sun dried out all of our blood-stained clothes. We were white robes by the end of it. And I told Denise that dream, and so she realized we had to leave. Yeah.
She also did a masterful move of dream interpretation. Wasn't that the dream about the eggs?
I was still at 29, 30, all this stuff happened. But yeah, so then in the dream, I get on a bus and I'm holding a dozen eggs, and they're rotting. And I told Denise this, and she said, "That's your precious egg." And apparently she had always thought of the way in which I protected something like a creativity or an energy. And she saw that everything was turning rancid. Yeah.
Which is, you resonated with on some level.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So I just want to ask a general question about this wandering time. Can you say what it felt like? Was it a mixture of excitement, following these leads from one place to another? Because you end up inviting Thomas Berry to speak at Matt Fox's place in Chicago. And he comes and speaks. And that's another major milestone. What happened when you met Thomas?
So, when I went to Chicago to work with Matt Fox, he said I could invite anybody to come and give a lecture. And I said, anybody? And he said, yeah, anybody, anybody. And I never thought it'd be possible to actually meet and talk with Thomas Berry. I was impacted by his work, and he was suddenly on the level of Plato and Confucius. I mean, it was like, I wouldn't even dream of approaching him, and then hear this opportunity to invite him to come. And I mean, it was up and down, so that I found his phone number and called up. He answered, which is unusual still for a person like Thomas Berry to answer a phone, especially. So I asked him if he would come out and give a talk, and he seemed to be agreeing. And then they talked about he had mimeographed some of his ideas, and I said, just a thought that they're mimeographed, 100 pages that he wrote. It's like, I'm going to climb through the lines. I'm so excited. And I said, oh God, I would love to read them. I'd love to read them. And then there was a pause, and then I thought, oh geez, he thinks I'm trying to get this for free. Oh no. When I was used to writing to publishers and asking them for a book to review for a course, and so it came into my mind. I said, well, look, I don't have any stationery, but really I'm teaching at Mundelein College right now, and if I can get some stationery and send it to you, could I look at your work? I mean, what would you need? Pause. Just your address. So he was a person. He didn't live with a mercantile consciousness
Yeah.
at all.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing you quote Thomas as having said to you early on, he said, the work of fashioning a new cosmological story is akin to a composer haunted by a music that does not yet exist. A composer haunted by music that does not yet exist. And, you know, as a soul initiation guide, I read that and I went, yes, that's exactly what it's like for a wanderer. A wanderer is searching for their, like their real life, or the poetry that they were born as, but they haven't heard the poem yet, or the song, or the dance that they were born to be in this lifetime. And so I just love that, a composer haunted by music that does not yet exist. So I'm wondering, did you feel that way during those years? Like, I was you, but there was something out there in the world that you were haunted by.
Yeah, very much so. But I also felt as if I was in a place, a setting, where I would be able to articulate it. And so in my year with him, that's really what I was, attempting to do, to capture that. And he just enabled me to see that that was the one thing I was here for. That is, again, that's outside of sort of modern science. The idea that there's not only do we have a relationship to the universe, but it's actually unique on an individual level, and I could feel that being around him. So, and I still do. Yeah.
Then there's this that after one is wandering in the depths and following the signs and having encounters and learning things, then the next thing that happens is, if things go well, is what I call soul encounter, which is soul encounter is some kind of glimpse of the pattern that your life makes and what's calling you forward in the world. Again, it's not a social role or a job, but it's something mythic. And there's several versions of this, but one of them is that somebody else sees the pattern and speaks it to us. So I think that's what happened for you. It seems to me that you were meeting with Thomas, maybe your first meeting with him in person, in New York, that is. And he says, telling the story of our time developmental universe so that the universe can enter into awareness of its complexity and beauty is the greatest spiritual task of our time, which is why you, Brian, struggled to fit in at the University of Puget Sound. It seems to me, Thomas says, your role is not in science exactly, but in cosmology. And then here's the boom. Your destiny is to tell the universe story. What happened when you heard that?
Well, it would. You use the word confirmation, but it would certainly be something like a confirmation of that initial energy that came into me when I read his essay, The New Story, and I was, in a certain sense, I have to say that I was hoping for something like that without knowing it in an explicit way. I was hoping for it, and it was a confirmation. So it was so deep. He had the ability, like you, to see deeply into people And you know, he saw who I was. I felt seen completely.
Yeah, beautiful. And again, it's not a career. It's not exactly a social role. To me, to be a cosmic storyteller. There's something mythic about that. Some people say that the world isn't made up of atoms, it's made up of facts. But actually, I prefer this one. The world isn't made up of facts, it's made up of stories. That's what actually the world is. And so to be a storyteller, it's something that the universe itself has made that a role that can be played. Okay, we've got just about 5 minutes. So I want to ask you this last question, which is, of all the thousands, I don't know, millions maybe, of people who get to the threshold of the descent to soul but don't actually make it because they don't have any guides, there's few who actually make it through. And so one of the questions I've been asking for years is, what is true about both their history and their psyche that allows them to succeed in this journey? And since we don't have much time left, I just want to focus on the psyche part.
Yeah.
That what is it about your psyche that allowed you to follow these signs so faithfully? And there were several places in your book I thought, do you know what I'm getting at, or should I just say it?
Yeah. No. I'd love to hear.
Okay. There's some amazing stories. And there's different ways to say this, and other people in the audience here might have other ways to say it. But here's a series of ways to say it. A deep capacity for more than human empathy. A deep capacity for empathy, but even more than human empathy. Or a porous psyche, or capacity for porosity, or thin boundaries between self and other, or a capacity for fluidity of conscious states. Some would say being prone to spells. Some would refer to neurodiversity. Or the capacity to merge with another. You might take that for granted, but you also might be aware that most humans don't have it to the degree that you have. So let's see, examples. This great scene when you were having that conversation with your mathematics colleague, Shell, and you were trying to explain to him about your lips, but anything that your speech is like made possible from the beginning of the universe. And you say to him, whenever my lips move, the dynamics of the fireball, the initial fireball, are there. My lips are right there in the initial explosion. The fireball is in my lips. That's why some of us refer to you as lips of the universe. And then, just one other example is, you were at the King Tut exhibit at the Seattle Space Needle, and you were there to court your mathematician muse, and you were just kind of wandering around, and you ended up next to a little box. I wonder if you would tell us about that, because you actually merged with not only the box, but the artisan who made it some millennia earlier. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, it's so interesting. I've never actually asked myself that question, so it's really interesting to me. So, yeah. So I was in the art museum, like the King Tut exhibit, and you know, I don't know, it just seems ridiculous that one of my deep spiritual experiences is staring at a box. I don't know, there's something wrong about that. But I really just got into this box, and I don't know if this is a common experience, but if you look at something long enough, really, really carefully, it kind of quivers, you know. And so I was looking at this thing quivering a little bit, and I thought, it's not quivering, you know, but it felt like it was quivering. And then it dawned on me that the quiver was my heartbeat. Because, you know, it changes the flow of blood, and there's a little bit of and so that blew my mind, you know. And then I realized that the box I was seeing, the phenomenon of the box, it was this big, and there's gold, and there's scratches on it and so forth. All of that I was creating. You know that bizarre feeling when you look at something long enough and you realize, you know, my eyeballs are not going out there and rubbing against it. That the light is coming in, and then I'm having this experience of it, a conscious experience of it. And I just blew my mind. And I never thought about anything like this. And then I realized, you know, this guy that carved it, or gal. And it just seemed like that person was so close, so nearby. And so I keep thinking about that whole experience, because to experience a box and to know it's, you know, it's thousands of years old, and that's something like time developmental perception. I don't know if that's even, you know, of interest to a psychologist, but it felt different to me. But so I felt like I felt like the artisan and the box and the people that put the box on a cushion, all of them were inside of me, all of them. And I was creating, like anybody else with a human, you know, nervous system, was creating this experience. It wasn't, I mean, it could have been a hallucination, you know, that could happen too, but it wasn't a hallucination. It was just a normal way we perceive things. And it was just blew my mind. But I think I know how to answer your question. I think I have, I think I'm sensitive to the magnificence of the universe. That's the way I put it. Yeah. And I felt this for such an early age. I never thought of it. I don't even want to think about it as special. I want to think about it as human. And that's what and so in other words, the desecration we see, I feel it because it's ruining something so beautiful, you know. That's probably what I would put. I like that list though. That was serious.
Yeah, a very deep capacity for empathizing, or merging with others, and that's something. I believe in a healthy society. People, that's part of being educated, is how do you do that? How do you shift consciousness? Some would even call it shape-shifting.
Yeah.
And some people just naturally have a greater capacity for that than others. And I think that's my experience of you. I just want to make one last comment here about this radical proposal, and this idea that the deepest way, I believe the deepest way that an individual human contributes to cosmogenesis is by discovering and being shapeshifted by their original instructions, that's what I mean by soul initiation. And so that we don't figure out what we're going to do in life, we remember it, or we discover it. We're initiated into something that's been waiting for us since we were born, or maybe before.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that's very much true of your life.
I love that. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Brian, for being willing to have this
so much.
conversation.
Can I have those notes?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. My soul.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to write it up in a little book, and I'll let you take a look after it's done.